Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
I got to see the sun this week.
It's nice, isn't it?
I opened the front door, walked outside, and just stared up at the sky.
Yeah.
We got to experience a weird blood moon lunar eclipse.
I think it was also called the worm moon.
Blood worm moon?
Blood worm.
I saw that in a
Yeah.
headline. It
don't know
creeped
what that
me out
meant.
and I didn't want to think about it. But we did set an alarm for, 2:30 in the morning?
Yeah, we went out and saw it. It wasn't quite totality. It was cool.
There's a little sliver of bright moon still.
Yeah, it was neat.
Yeah, it was a neat thing.
I saw enough.
I'm glad I woke up for 5 minutes to look at it.
It wasn't nearly as cool as the eclipse last year.
The solar eclipse.
Yeah, that was cool. But last week, because of the full moon and just because of at my high school that I teach at, we don't have a spring break.
Mm-hmm.
We were like feeling it last week. Like we need a spring
Oh,
break.
the lunar vibes were impacting you?
Yeah, as someone who worked in retail and now who works in education, I can tell you within like 48 hours when a full moon is happening.
Okay.
I pretty much got it figured out. I thought it was a joke when I worked at Staples in college. And then I was like, oh no, there's something about
There's
the
something
moon
to
that-
this?
Yeah. So Friday, the weather was beautiful. We had a really difficult morning because we had a presentation on Aaron's Law, which is a requirement in the state of Ohio.
That students receive training about sexual assault?
Yeah. And just like healthy choices and things like that. It's a tough topic.
Yeah.
It was a different group who came and presented, and it was clinical. And I think it was difficult. It's always going to be difficult for
Just
kids
like
to hear because
maybe like a little bit too straightforward.
yeah,
Okay.
you know, there are kids that struggle every year with it. It was a rough morning. So it's like 70 degrees out. It's beautiful. Not a cloud in the sky. So the business teacher and the computer teacher across from me, I had yearbook class and we just sat out on the turf and basked in the sun like good little turtles. It was wonderful. We all needed it.
Some vitamin D.
It was good for us. It gave the kids some time to go out and sit or to run lots of unplayed games and stuff. Teenagers need that still. So, and teachers do too. It gives you a chance to talk to kids you might not otherwise get to. But some days you just gotta. And last week, full moon, Freaky Friday, it was a good day to go outside and enjoy some sun is all.
All right. Well, this episode, we are doing an education news headline roundup. But before we get to that, just want to remind you, go ahead and sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter. It's where you can get the latest updates, episode announcements, resources, workshop offerings from Moonbeam Multimedia. That is us. And if there's a story in your local educational community that you would like us to cover, please contact us using our website or write to us hello@16to1.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Bonus points for positive vibes.
Yes, bonus points if you're telling us something happy.
Good.
Or way more likely.
Anything good. Okay.
This is the education news headline roundup.
With only one good thing to report.
Only one thing
And we'll
that is
save
good.
it for the end. Okay, what's going on? Anything? Is there any news right now?
There's some news.
Okay, what you got first?
Well, so this is the education news headline roundup where we compile and analyze the most compelling stories and research from around the world about everything having to do with learning or teaching or leading in schools and other educational organizations. We're going to stick all of the links for these in the show notes. You can find those at 16to1.com/archives. The news in the U.S. with regard to education is that the U.S. Department of Education is now half the size of what it was about this time a month ago. According to NPR, the department has lost about 1,300 staff members in the past week or two through resignations and terminations. There are already several lawsuits underway to challenge what opponents are calling a gutting of the department, designed to undermine its ability to carry out congressionally mandated functions. people have been pushing back on a variety of these orders. I think there was a lawsuit with the VA firings. There's also, I think, the National Park Service, the probationary workers who were fired were reinstated. So
there's been a few groups that's already had.
Yeah. That's just to say that it's not clear to me yet that these 1,300 firings, resignations are going to stay fired or resigned in the coming weeks. We'll see what happens.
But as of this recording,
yes,
that's where it stands.
Yep. A couple of these lawsuits, just to give an example, there's a parent lawsuit that's backed by disability advocates. We'll link a ProPublica article about that, arguing that the staffing cuts are going to leave the Office for Civil Rights unable to address and arbitrate cases of discrimination in public schools. They're congressionally mandated to deal with these things. So there's another lawsuit that does something similar, filed by 20 states' attorneys general. Maybe these things become overturned, but that's where things stand right now. If you're not sure what all might be impacted by some of these cuts and the ongoing disruptions sort of educational services at the federal level, we talked about this at length in our episode 122, which was the U.S. general election debrief. We talked a lot about the programs and other things that could be impacted. Yeah. So if you want a kind of exhaustive list discussion of what all might be disrupted by this, go check that out.
We're probably going to be covering it, not in this specific episode, but in the future one, that there's a potential for millions of dollars to be cut that helps feed children at school. And that's something that my school is receiving this year, is free lunches for every student. So we'll keep an eye on it, but I'm sure that we'll have more to update on.
Yep. Okay, second story, still kind of evolving. There's a Syrian national and Palestinian student activist named Mahmoud Khalil. He first rose to public prominence during Gaza war protests in the spring of 2024 that happened on the campus of Columbia University in New York City. He was one of the people who was negotiating with administrators. He was later suspended by the university for his role in all of that. He was arrested by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officials on Saturday, March 8th. Khalil is a legal resident and a green card holder. He was taken to an ICE detention facility in Louisiana, which is quite far from where he was living in New York.
Yeah.
He's being held pending a series of court hearings to determine whether or not he will be deported. It's not clear that he's been charged with a crime. The Trump administration has accused him of distributing pro-Hamas propaganda.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll just let that...
Nervous laughter.
Yeah, so that's what he's being accused of, but again, not charged with a crime. Trump called the arrest the first of, quote, many to come on Truth Social. And then a second Palestinian student at Columbia University, Lika Cordia, was arrested in New Jersey just this past Friday, charged with overstaying an expired student visa. And then a third Columbia international student fled to Canada last week as ICE agents tried to find her after her student visa was abruptly revoked by the U.S. State Department. All three of these students have in common pretty outspoken participation in pro-Palestinian demonstrations on Columbia's campus last spring.
I have a question.
What is that?
Why Columbia?
Well, that's a great question. This administration seems to have Columbia in its crosshairs at least a little bit.
They seem to be a target for sure.
Columbia University, and I can tell you this from firsthand experience because when I was there, it was in the wake of Occupy Wall Street, which a lot of Columbia students were participating in at the time. Columbia has a pretty rich institutional history, symbolic history too, of protest movements.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, but it just seems like they keep coming back around.
There are other instances pretty famous. In 1968 and 72, students took over Hamilton Hall and other campus buildings to protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. 1985, there were South African divestment and anti-apartheid protests. In 1987, there were protests against the university response to campus racial tension. And then, like I said, Occupy Wall Street in 2011 and beyond. And then 2019, there was a fossil fuel divestment protest. So long and storied history of Columbia students participating in campus protests. I don't know if that's what is making Columbia a special target of the Trump administration, but I think it's worth noting the sort of storied history there.
Yeah, definitely.
My question about this is going to be for the impact on the international student population at U.S. universities. We're entering the year of the enrollment cliff, which corresponds to a demographic decline in college-age people, college people who are likely to attend college. And in the same year, we're going to face what I think is going to be a pretty immediate backlash in that international students are going to feel unsafe coming to U.S. college campuses because they are going to be afraid to exercise speech in these political speech in these places, or even be accused of being accused of exercising
or to believe different, or
So there's going to be a chilling effect, I think, on international student enrollment trends. I think this also undermines broader academic research and international collaboration goals at universities. Not only are students not going to come here, but universities abroad are going to become hesitant to work with American students in universities.
For sure.
And I also think there's this, at the individual university level, places like Columbia are going to have a real difficulty. They're going to be kind of breaking faith with their students to the extent that they're complying with these.
Where's the trust?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's sad. It's sad all around and dangerous all around.
I think I'm going to, after this, start investigating how Columbia is funded. I'm interested in their situation. I'm just curious what they're sitting on and what kind of funds they could be at risk of losing. And that's going to be something that I talk about in our next story as well. Schools are starting to fear losing support because they're not upholding to the current Trump administration's plans.
Well, Columbia just lost, I think, what was it? A huge, like $400 million in federal funding.
That's what I was, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to see what else they're sitting on.
I, too, am curious why he's making such an example of Columbia specifically.
Yeah. Well, this actually kind of segues almost directly into this next story.
Uh-huh.
So the Department of Education has launched a Title VI investigation into dozens of U.S. colleges and universities. And it's part of their ongoing targeted attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, which you've probably just heard as DEI. These colleges and universities are being targeted because they have partnered with a group called the PhD Project. And according to the PhD Project, this is their mission, quote, to expand the pool of workplace talent by developing business school faculty who encourage, mentor, and support tomorrow's leaders. So that's what they're aiming to do. They help support Black, Hispanic, and Native American students as they earn graduate degrees.
Yeah, I had to go look this up because I was like, I've never heard of the PhD Project. And if you read the Department of Education's press release about this, they call out this PhD Project specifically. I went and looked it up. It's just a little education nonprofit.
Yeah. Who are just trying to help support minority groups to earn graduate degrees.
Yeah.
The Department of Education alleges that these institutions that they've targeted have violated, quote, civil rights obligations to end the use of racial preferences and stereotypes in education programs and activities, end quote. We actually discussed this in episode 104 in the landmark Supreme Court cases that changed U.S. education part 2, where we talked about them rolling back affirmative action, the Supreme Court rolling back.
Yeah, that was a brand new ruling at the time of that episode, and now we are seeing the effects of it.
So just to name a few of the institutions that are being targeted by this right now, Vanderbilt, Yale, Duke, University of Cincinnati, and The Ohio State University. And there's tons of others, obviously. U.S. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said, quote, students must be assessed according to merit and accomplishment, not prejudged by the color of their skin. We will not yield on this commitment, end quote.
The mental gymnastics to get there.
We are hooping.
I'm really surprised, for example, that Columbia is not on this list. Why not?
Well, I mean, there were like dozens and dozens of schools on this list.
Like George Mason, MIT.
Yeah,
for some reason, Montana State University, Bozeman.
Well, there's like 2 groups being targeted too. So it's, yeah. Anyways, if you're in any of these places and you're going through this in real time and you would like to email us to share anything that you can, we will not reveal any information that's, identifiable, but we're just curious. So all of this coming from a woman who doesn't know what her job entails.
You're talking about Linda McMahon?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can't remember whether the last time we did headlines she had been confirmed yet, but Linda McMahon has been confirmed as the Secretary of Education.
I mean, she basically took a sinking ship and was like, here we go.
France might be coming to save us, a French university. Can you tell us a little bit about Aix Marseille University?
Okay, so earlier, actually, you kind of talked about some concerns that you have, or that we have really, about international students. This is kind of a direct response to some of these concerns. So Aix Marseille University, which is France's largest university, as of right now, they've raised enough money to support about 15 American scientists to come to their university and continue to do their research and study. And this is because there's a fear right now that there's going to be a scientific exile under the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. There are many researchers in America that have already lost or will lose their federal funding due to cuts, different executive orders, or other moves by the Trump presidency. So some of this information came from an article from 404 Media, and it said this, quote, "The language of many of his executive orders is also so broad that researchers at public universities and other research institutions worry they'll lose funding for their work if they even mention climate, gender, race, or equity, terms that the Trump administration has been trying to wipe off any federal site and program," end quote. Aix Marseille shared that their key research areas are health, LGBT medicine, epidemiology, infectious diseases, inequalities, immunology, environment and climate change, including natural disaster management, greenhouse gases, social impact, artificial intelligence, humanities and social sciences, communication, psychology, history, cultural heritage, and astrophysics. So the university is working with their local chamber of commerce and their regional government to help these researchers get the support that they need to move to France, which includes getting their families, their necessary documents, help find them housing and things like this. This seems to be the beginning of what will be a ton of stories like this to help support this really important research that's at risk of being lost.
These programs are definitely going to continue to be helpful over the next years, months and years.
I mean, these universities aren't doing this without the benefit of what it could do for them as well. So it's a great olive branch, if you will. I do think we're going to probably see more and more scientists and researchers end up in situations like this where they're going to find another program that's compatible with their research to continue it, because otherwise can't continue here in the United States at this moment.
Yep.
Okay. So some good news.
Some science of reading updates.
We haven't talked about this for a while.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the science of reading and the reaction to it and the sort of legislative impact that has been happening over the last couple of years. That was all kicked off, at least in part, because of Emily Hanford and APM's Sold a Story podcast. We've talked about that several times on here, your reaction to that. Just as a refresher, the science of reading is the latest and greatest phrasing that school leaders and curriculum companies are using to talk to each other about literacy curricula that are in vogue, I guess I should say. And people in general associate the science of reading with phonics instruction. It's not just that. The science of reading is just kind of like a buzz term that's supposed to mean literacy instruction, honestly.
Yeah.
We talk about the science of reading at length in our episode 107 if you want to get up to speed on all of that. Teachers have understandably been a little bit skeptical in watching the pendulum swing in the reading wars from what they thought was scientifically proven literacy instruction to a new thing that is now the actual, for real scientific literacy instruction. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to take a moment to try to find out, a couple of years into many state-led experiments in implementing science of reading curricula, how are things going?
Yeah.
Here in Ohio, statewide, more than half of the lowest performing school districts needed to change out their curricula in order to conform with the new science of reading standards that were launched here. That's like a huge expenditure on classroom curricula, first of all, but second of all the training needed to implement all of this new stuff. So anyway, it's been a huge undertaking. And so we have a couple of early indicators of success with science of reading programs. Do you want to tell us about these a little bit?
Well, one is in Ohio, actually, Steubenville. And I actually found this information. It was sent actually by one of our friends to me and then followed up. And it actually came from APM reports as well. So in Steubenville, Ohio, last year, almost every third grader in their school district scored proficient on the state reading test. In Ohio, for all of those tested students, about 1 in 3 missed the mark. There are only 3 districts who scored better than Steubenville last year.
Wow.
And just to kind of paint a picture of Steubenville, it was once a booming city and has since sort of collapsed because of the fall of the industry and the coal mines and things like that. And so it is not an affluent place. And here in this kind of struggling part of the state is this little gem of a school district who's working really hard to help their third graders read, which I love. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think that this is a great support for their success, but nearly 80% of their children attend preschool, which costs only $100 per month for full-day classes, and it's free for the poorest families, and that program starts at age 3. I can't even tell you 6 and 7 times that is what I know people that pay. So the other interesting thing about Steubenville is that every teacher in the school leads a reading class, and the article made a point to say that even like the gym teacher teaches one. It helps cut down on the class size of the reading class. And so some of the Steubenville classes are as small as 6 students.
The one thing that comes out of all of these success stories is that what we already know to work does in fact work, and we just need to fund schools so they can successfully carry out those missions, because small class sizes and individualized attention is key for literacy, especially at early ages.
So these students receive at least 90 minutes a day of reading class, with some receiving more based on support needs. And Steubenville is currently using the Success for All Foundation, which is a program that's aligned with the science of reading.
Okay.
So let's head south. Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
So according to NPR, in 2019, Louisiana's 4th graders ranked 50th in the country for reading.
So last.
And now they've risen to 16th.
Okay.
That's great.
Even with like pandemic, they've caught up to pandemic learning losses.
Yeah. So
okay.
Actually, my next line, Chelsea,
oh, my
it's
bad.
from NPR, and the quote says this: Louisiana is the only state that has not only made a full recovery from the pandemic in both math and reading, but has improved upon its reading scores since 2019.
Okay, my bad. I didn't mean to steal the win from your sales there.
You did great, and that was a great point to make, and NPR made it as well.
I'm just impressed.
So how did Louisiana do it? Their districts bought into it. They aligned themselves with research. Their Department of Ed at the state supported the education of their teachers, become teacher mentors, and they placed a heavy focus on literacy. They've supported their schools to allow for better classroom size, small group learning.
Small group, there it is again.
Mm-hmm.
Small group learning. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And these groups allow for more learning time with teachers based on their ability. These teachers have been supported to work together, to meet together, and they're given time to break down their data to see what it tells them.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, the state of Louisiana has the strongest accountability system in the country for reading. 3rd graders who are not on pace with their reading goals will be held back next year.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been something that has been walked back significantly over the last 20 years. It used to be far more common for students to be held back.
There are pros and cons of doing that. There are social cons. There are social pros.
Yes, there are.
It's
not an easy decision anytime.
No,
it's made.
and it's a decision that should be made for each individual student.
I agree with
honestly.
that.
So anyway,
but I will say that the things that I saw overlapping between the Steubenville city schools and the Louisiana Department of Ed is that they're supporting their teachers. They're shrinking class sizes. They are offering relevant support, and they're giving teachers the time to do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that Steubenville is able to keep it up. The Ohio legislature is currently not super friendly to public schools, and so I hope that their foundation is solid enough to carry them through with the loss of funding if that does happen, but I'm glad to see their commitment.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit tricky to look back on this period because of the pandemic, and its effect on learning is going to, I think, skew a lot of the data about the effectiveness of the first couple of years of implementing science of reading changes. Probably more than like 35 states at this point have passed legislation in the last couple of years pertaining to the science of reading. I think it is going to be hard for us to look back and sort out national effects and trends and international in the case of the pandemic. But like, I do think it's going to be a little bit difficult to track the success of some of these things across the data stories that we have available to us just right now. But we're going to keep on top of us and try to continue to track the impact that these changes make. I do think we need to keep our eye on the prize of just looking at literacy rates and looking at the impact of these things.
I can speak directly to this because the way that my school does textbook renewals, I think it's like we're on like a 7-year schedule. I can tell you that when we were last going through the cycle of trying to decide if we were going to buy a textbook or not, all of those textbooks were doing a scene or an act from Anne Frank or Caesar or Antigone, and there was no complete text in any of it. And we just kept saying, why? Why aren't we doing the whole thing? The textbooks that I was seeing were straying away from that. But I can tell you that I just finished night with my students, and had I taken away night at any point before it was over, I would be in danger. Like, on days that we weren't reading, kids were mad we weren't reading. And I think that's really important. Now, I teach high schoolers, so I understand that that's a little bit different. But none of us actually in my department want to get away from that. But that's why I think these reading levels for third graders or whatever are so important. Because how do you understand the context of the Caesar funeral speech if you don't know who Brutus is or Antony is or anything else? We're losing so much of that.
This is the part of the show where we ask you, our listeners, trivia questions. You can write in with your responses, hello@16to1.com. If you write in with the correct response, send us your address, we'll send you stickers. Or even if you don't send us the correct response, we'll still send you stickers. Do you want to do last episode's question?
Yeah.
Great.
So this is from our episode about the Steamboat Girls.
Steamboat Ladies.
Yeah. An alumnus of both Oxford and Trinity, this famous author, playwright, was born to a father who was an acclaimed doctor who was knighted for his service, and to a poet mother who was closely associated with the Young Irelander Rebellion of 1848. Who is this well-known son? It's Oscar Wilde.
I still haven't looked up much information about the Young Irelander Rebellion of 1848, but I really want to.
Yeah.
I need to actually add it to my research list.
Yeah. You know what? My seniors actually really enjoy Oscar Wilde, so.
Fun.
Yeah. What's this episode's question?
It's about Columbia University, since we seem to be so obsessed with Columbia University.
I was doing so much reading about Columbia. Are they the Blue Lions?
They're Blue Lions.
Okay,
yes.
yeah. I knew Lions. I just
Blue
wasn't
Lions.
sure if it was Blue Lions as a phrase.
Sad, sad Lions.
Sad, sad Lions.
Blue Lions.
Their girls' basketball team tried really hard last year, though. Okay, so what's our question about Columbia?
How many presidents and prime ministers have attended Columbia University in the city of New York? It's a lot.
A lot more than I thought.
And what did you learn in the last couple of weeks?
I'm staying on theme, and I'm looking for recommendations if anyone has a good one. I was learning about the creation of New York City and how it was originally called New Amsterdam after it was settled by the Dutch. Because Amsterdam was kind of like the hub of progress at the time. Amsterdam was seen as this like exciting, growing city. And so when the Dutch settled it, they called it New Amsterdam.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Would you like to know what I learned also has overlap with the Dutch?
Okay, tell me about the Dutch.
Well, I didn't want to cut you off. Are you done?
I have nothing else to add.
Nothing about...
That's really all I learned.
Okay.
I learned that they used to grow a lot of wheat.
99% Invisible, the podcast that I really, really like. It's about design and like urban design sometimes. Yeah. I think they might have had some episodes about building New York City. Okay.
They did.
Because I remember learning about the swamp, how part of Manhattan is just a swamp and you can't build skyscrapers.
I think he also was the one that we listened to an episode where he talked about some of the houses from the Gilded Age as well. I think he did.
Probably.
I think he did some stuff on them as well when we were watching that show.
That's a great podcast, by the way. 99PI, one of my favorites.
We haven't talked about them for a while, but they are one of our favorites.
No, I haven't been keeping up with it. I need to go back.
Yeah, wheat fields. Lots of wheat fields in New York City. So what do you have?
Well, so the Dutch feature prominently in the fiction that I just finished. But I was reading Neil Stephenson's Termination Shock. It's a fictional near future climate story. I really liked Snow Crash, which is another Neil Stephenson novel about an imagined future of virtual reality.
I'm almost certain you've talked about that on here.
It's a really interesting book. At the time that I read it, it felt like an escape.
Yeah.
Termination Shock, on the other hand, doesn't really feel like an escape. It feels like what's going to happen next week. Oh, so it's about the world
No thanks.
post-climate point of no return, and they're trying to do these weird geoengineering schemes. One of the parties that features prominently in this novel, they're Dutch because Shell, the oil company, features. I guess there's Dutch origin there. Anyway, it's climate fiction. It's not reality, but there was a lot of research on his part that went into what the world might look like if we're trying to mitigate grand-scale climate concerns and disasters. How geoengineering might help one part of the world but might hurt another part of the world. It's certainly an interesting conversation. Yeah. Definitely not an escape, though. And it was a really big, chunky book, and it took me forever to get through because I was just like, oh.
Yeah, it felt like you were in it for a while.
There are really funny parts, though. among other things, that the American solution to climate change is just to like shoot giant guns into the sky, which I think is exactly what America will do if it comes to it.
Yeah.
They shoot giant bullets of sulfur into the air to try to mimic a volcanic eruption that cooled the earth. And then the other book that I picked up was a third one that now I've read by James Glick. It's called Genius, the Life and Science of Richard Feynman. He's a physicist. Yeah. So that's what I'm learning about. Some physics.
I don't have anything queued up at the moment. I'm going to have to work on something. I'm in a lull. I'm back in the podcast stage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a couple of podcasts I just really, really love. And I was a little bit behind because I was listening to a couple of books and I go back and forth. So I'm back on a podcast kick right now. So I am behind on my reading goal for the year already. So I'm going to have to step it up. I think I've only had like 6 of 40 so far.
I'm too.
So
I need to get back in the swing. All right. Anything else?
No, that's it.
That wraps it. We will talk to you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
Bye. Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. If I don't laugh, I'll cry.